In 1865, Rochester was approaching the end of its time known as a frontier town. Although the completion of the Erie Canal in 1824 had significantly impacted western migration and put Rochester on the map, the Transcontinental Railway was yet to come. The population of Rochester had grown to 60,000 people, over half of whom were employed in manufacturing, the other half in trade, transportation, and other professions. There were even a few farmers who held on to their land as the city grew. And at that time, there were 6 means of transportation. Steam-powered trains came to Rochester in 1837, when the first steam locomotive departed from Rochester for Batavia. That locomotive was delivered to Rochester by canal boat, as there were no tracks east of the city. And in 1853, 5 railroads that led out of Rochester consolidated into the New York Central. A thriving city had other forms of transportation in the form of hacks, a forerunner to the present-day public bus system and school buses. It's hard to imagine, but the bicycle was in its infancy at the time. Rochester continued to be serviced by stagecoaches. Pictured here is the Abbott Downing stagecoach, which was used primarily in the eastern regions of the country. In its infancy was the horse-drawn railway. One of the first lines ran from the Four Corners, Buffalo Street, Main and State Street north to Lake Ontario. If you were to look at a picture of downtown Rochester in that era, you would see farm wagons, buggies, and in the winter, sleighs all mixed in with bicycles, horse-drawn cars, and pedestrians. One would also encounter canal packet boats being towed through the middle of Rochester on the viaduct that bridged the Genesee River. It is likely that the year 1865 would not soon be forgotten by the people of Rochester and the surrounding areas. Many big events happened in that year. On March 17th, St. Patrick's Day, there wasn't a parade. Instead, Rochester suffered one of its greatest floods, with the Genesee River breaching its banks and leaving as much as 4 to 5 feet of water on Front Street and the four corners of State and Buffalo. Just weeks later, on April 6th, General Lee and General Grant met to sign an agreement that would end the 4-year-long Civil War. Not unlike cities all across the country, local newspapers recorded that there were great celebrations with church bells ringing out on the streets of Rochester, and in the weeks and the months that followed, sons, brothers, and fathers began returning home. On April 15th, President Lincoln was assassinated at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. Again, like people across the land, Rochesterians' grief and fear returned to people's hearts. It was on April 27th that, in spite of the extensive damage that resulted from the St. Patrick's Day flood only a month before, hundreds of Rochesterians stood silently as the New York Central Rail Station at 3 o'clock in the morning as President Lincoln's funeral train passed slowly through Rochester. It is in this setting that we discover, among some other denominational churches, that there were only 3 Baptist churches: First Baptist, Second Baptist, and the First German Baptist Church. In many an instance, as the Baptist movement spread across the country west of the Allegheny Mountains and on to the West Coast, Sabbath schools, or Sunday schools, were established in new villages and towns. These schools were often established in city neighborhoods that did not have an organized church. Many would result in the formation of a church. This begins the prelude for Lake Avenue Baptist Church.